I'm Jim Csek. I'm here with Scott Dedles. You're watching Kelowna Now live on X, and we're here today in our Bitcoin series, and we're going to talk about the 5 top myths, and we're going to bust those myths today, right?
That's
Myth
right.
Busters.
Yeah.
There was a show like that, I think, right?
We're not going to be doing any science today, though.
No science today. No throwing stuff. No. Yeah. So there's a bunch of myths on Bitcoin, and also a lot of people that'll help with their understanding, because they hear things, just like everything. They hear things and they kind of like turn it into, where'd we go? Oh, there we're back. Look at that. We're gone. We're back. Things are all over the place. I think we need more dilithium crystals. Anyway, where do you want to start?
Yeah, so this is something, like commonly the kinds of objections you get around Bitcoin from people who haven't studied it or don't know a lot about it. It is often the same kinds of things. And so this is a collection of like common criticisms, or the most common things that I get all the time in my Bitcoin travels. So we've got 5, and the first one I thought we would start with is my personal favorite: is Bitcoin a Ponzi scheme? And
the answer is
the answer is definitely not. So Ponzi schemes
or multi-level marketing.
Yeah, there's a guy named Charles Ponzi who invented this, and it's an organized mechanism where people are lured into a scam, and the money that they bring in is used to pay the people that came into the scam before them. Now, it's true that Bitcoin's price goes up as new people come in and start buying it, and I think that's where the confusion around is Bitcoin a Ponzi.
But there's no levels. There's no.
That's right.
Like, it's like you don't, like, if I buy Bitcoin tomorrow, you don't get a piece of my.
No.
Like, what is it? Multi-level marketing. You get, everybody at like different levels get pieces of that pie. They just have one here in Kelowna. I think it's called the Dinner Club, and I would invite 10 people to the house of the Dinner Club, and it would be $10,000 to come. Right, you give me $10,000, so I collect $100,000 for this dinner club, and then you hold one, and then you get, the next people get like 9, but then I get 1, and then it just kind of keeps filtering down. So those are, like, there's no value being exchanged either, right? So you can't cash out. You're relying, I guess, in a true Ponzi scheme, you're relying on more pigeons.
Yes.
More pigeons have to show up.
Yeah, and so as more people come into Bitcoin, that does theoretically make the price go up, but Bitcoin doesn't generate a yield, and there is no mechanism to pay people that were in before. So some people get to sell Bitcoin at a higher price because they happen to buy it cheaper. Yeah. But the price of Bitcoin is supply and demand, and there's an inelastic supply. So as the demand goes up, the price goes up.
And one of the things that you've taught me is that it has a finite supply. So it's not like multi-level marketing where you can just keep bringing people in. So
yes.
So that is one of the bigger differences, I guess, on Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, and then the last point to make about Ponzi is that there is nobody behind Bitcoin. So the Ponzi schemes themselves have a founder, have somebody who is the mastermind of the system that is at the top of the pyramid. And while there is a founder of Bitcoin, that person, it's not obvious that they've actually made any money off Bitcoin.
Yeah, and I would say one of the big and again, in full disclosure, I don't own any Bitcoin. And Scott is a sponsor of the show for BlockRewards, so we'll get that out of the way. But most recently, ETFs are into Bitcoin in a big way. Mm-hmm. And so that's big financial players that are involved. And so they don't usually get into Ponzi schemes.
No, I mean, and to your point about that, regulators wouldn't approve an asset like an ETF
right,
if they thought it was a Ponzi scheme.
So that in itself, I would say that would bust that myth. With ETFs and SEC and all that kind of stuff, I would say that would kind of, if somebody says that, just like, well, then the whole stock market is a Ponzi scheme, and some people might say that's true. Yeah. But then, and that's their interpretation of what a Ponzi scheme is, I guess.
Totally. But if you're using that interpretation, you're not using the word Ponzi the right way.
No, so. But I'm just saying Bernie Madoff would come to mind as one of the bigger, and that was kind of a variation of a Ponzi scheme too, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
It was he needed money, no different than our friend that just got sentenced.
25 years.
Sam Bankman-Fried got sentenced 25 years. Will he serve 25 years?
I don't know. He's not going to do enough. However many he does, it's not enough.
And he still won't accept responsibility.
Yeah. And that was a Ponzi scheme for sure.
That for sure, and because they were using other investors money to pay off other investors. You know what I mean? And they needed more money to keep paying more people. Yeah. So that's Ponzi.
That's a Ponzi.
Look up Sam Bankman-Fried, and there's his pictures next to the word Ponzi.
Important difference.
There you go. So I think we busted that one.
Yeah, and that one we can leave behind. Second one, and this one comes from, you see it perpetuated by people like Jamie Dimon, who's the head of JP Morgan Bank.
Right.
Loves to say, well, we have no way of really knowing if the cap is actually 21 million and Satoshi might come back from the grave and double the supply, and then all of a sudden we have nothing. And this is another one that it might be tough to accept if you don't understand how the rules of Bitcoin work, but it is absolutely firmly 21 million. It is auditable and provable, and it's never.
Isn't that like the whole strength of Bitcoin? Is that it is like you can see everything on the chain, kind of thing?
Yeah.
Like it's visible.
Yes. So there's sort of two parts about busting this myth. The one is the transparency and visibility. So all the Bitcoins and where they are is viewable. You can't say who owns them, but you can see where they are. And people who participate in running Bitcoin nodes, they're all running a copy of the Bitcoin rules. So anyone can change those rules, but for a change to be enacted in the network, the majority of the participants would need to start running those changed rules. And so it'd be like changing the rules of chess. Anybody could change the rules of chess, but then you would have to go out and find other players who wanted to play with your new rules.
Right.
So that's not happening, because you're never going to bring that critical mass of people. The Bitcoin, the algorithm that is responsible for determining the rate at which new coins are issued is set in stone. So that's what's in the process of transpiring with this Bitcoin halving event that's coming up in a few weeks. And every 4 years,
is there like a gala though too? Is there like people that are invested? They show up in like suits and that. And drink wine.
There might be a local event in Kelowna. We're looking for a venue right now. If you want to,
I'll be a server at that if I get tips in Bitcoin.
Okay, if you want to accept Bitcoin, maybe we can host it here.
There you go.
So every 4 years, the Bitcoin that are mined every 10 minutes, that number reduces by 50%. And what it's trying to do is arrive at a point in 2140-ish where there are no Bitcoin left to mine. And so all of that stuff has to stay the way it is for the entire system to run the way it's meant to. So that's the other reason why there will never be a change to this 21 million number. You'll never convince all the people that are already invested in Bitcoin to change the number. You wouldn't be able to do it even if you wanted to, and this number exists, like the math behind how it runs is set for another 115 years.
Well, there you go. So on the event, let's host it here. And I'll just charge a small Bitcoin fee, and that'll be my first Bitcoin.
We can show you how to accept Bitcoin.
There you go. I'm in. So if you're looking to come to a Bitcoin event, we're having the party here. Oh, there you go.
This is another one of my favorites. So it's true that you can divide Bitcoin. We'll call it.
I think I asked you this question.
You have asked me this, yeah. So one Bitcoin is made up of 100 million subunits that are called Satoshis.
Yeah.
And it is actually technically possible to add more zeros and divide it further. And so this infinite divisibility has led some people to wonder, so if you can divide this thing an infinite number of times, can you really say that it's finite? And the analogy that Bitcoiners love to use to remedy this argument is talking about pizza. Because if the infinite divisibility argument were true, one pizza would be enough to feed everyone on Earth forever, because you could just keep cutting it up and cutting it up and cutting it up.
I think our friend Jesus did that.
That's right. turning.
Was it some fish and bread or something? So it's possible.
So it is possible, but probably not for us, unless you're looking to ascend to.
That was just a joke for anybody that wants to get angry about that.
Yeah. So cutting a pizza up into more pieces of pizza doesn't make any more pizza. It just makes smaller units of pizza. And in the case of money, when you inflate the supply, when you add more money, you reduce the amount of the unit of money. And that's what we're experiencing in Canada right now. You may have noticed, Jim, in your day-to-day that money doesn't quite go as far as it used to. And that's because they've made a whole bunch more money. With Bitcoin, when you start using smaller and smaller units of it, you're not making any more of it. You're just
dividing that. It's like changing a dollar for change.
Yeah.
Like a quarter, like 3 quarters. How do you do this now? 2 dimes and a nickel.
Yeah, that's right.
And we can't say pennies because got rid of those.
Yeah. So in government.
So that's basically a Satoshi is just like a division of, like the Bitcoin is the paper dollar.
Yeah.
And then the Satoshis would
like
be
a penny.
the smaller denominations of that same dollar.
Yeah. So you hear Bitcoiners talking often about the day they're looking forward to in the future, where it's Satoshi dollar parity. So when 1 Satoshi is worth $1, that's it's a moment in time we're all excited about.
What's a Satoshi worth today?
Whew, you're challenging my math. I wouldn't be able to do it on the fly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's not.
How many Satoshis to a Bitcoin?
100 million. So
so a sliver then.
Yeah.
So I need more than 1 Satoshi for entry to this event.
Yeah, yeah. We can determine the pricing after.
After, yeah. Okay, that makes sense because if the dollar's the dollar and you break it into coins, then it's still the dollar, right?
Yeah.
You're not adding anymore. Whereas, have you ever seen that image of a room? They have $1 million, $100 million, or $1 billion and $1 trillion, and the magnitude of $1 trillion. Like,
yeah, it's like 50 football fields.
Like I think $1 million almost fits like on a table, right? It's not very much. And then the $1 billion is quite, it's much more impressive than the million until you see the trillion.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Go look that up on the internet. You'll find it. Just go 1 million, 1 billion, 1 trillion. It's crazy. Jason maybe find it while we're doing this. We'll give him something to do.
Question number 3.
Question 4.
Oh, is this 4 already?
There you go.
So there's this question about if the miner rewards, this is kind of a 2-part question. If the miner rewards are reducing in half, is that a disincentive for miners to keep mining? And part 2 that I usually get asked on top of that is, what happens when there aren't any Bitcoin left to mine, and what will the miners do then? Does the whole thing just collapse? So I kind of want to tackle these in 2 parts.
I'm just going to say this with my basic knowledge. Isn't the halving kind of perpetuates forever kind of thing? It's not kind of what it kind of does. It just, there's less.
So there's 21 million Bitcoin in total. There's 19 million and change that have been mined already.
So that's out there already.
Yeah. So if something cuts in half every 4 years, it's an exponentially declining rate of issuance.
Right.
So like most of the Bitcoin that will ever exist have already been issued. By 2034, I think 99.9% of them will have been issued by then. So in gold, we've talked about this at different times. There's a measurement in the production of commodities that is called stock to flow, and it measures how long it would take to produce the total amount of the existing commodity in the world, how many years it would take based on the amount of annual production. So the gold stock to flow ratio, I think, is around 60. So it would take 60 years, based on how much gold we mine right now, it would take 60 years, if it was possible, to mine all the gold that exists.
It takes 60 years to permit a mine in Canada.
Yeah, if you're lucky. To mine all the gold again. And so with Bitcoin, the stock to flow number basically doubles every 4 years because of the new amount being mined cuts in half.
Because that makes sense.
Yeah. And so when there's...
Can you bring that chart back up? Because that's...
When we hit 20... And that's the flat part of this curve. That's what we're looking at. Well, basically, once we hit 2034, Bitcoin stock to flow is infinity because there's no flow. And there, we'll have a stock, but there's really no more new ones to be made. So as far as miners have the incentive to keep mining, it all relies on the idea that Bitcoins are going to continue to appreciate in price because they're
big investments for those Bitcoin,
hundreds of millions,
like
huge.
To do a data center.
Yeah,
and they take a lot of energy.
Yes,
they take a lot of energy.
Yeah. My podcast episode this week is about Bitcoin mining with a VP from Riot. Riot's one of the largest Bitcoin mining firms, and they're based in Texas.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting discussion about the energy consumption and environmental impact of Bitcoin mining. And
on the podcast, how do people find the podcast?
Yeah. Our Block Rewards channel on YouTube is, we can maybe link that in the...
in the description here.
Yeah.
You'll find it like here, right?
Yeah. I think it's up there. I don't know. So that was part one of the question. Part two is what happens in 2140 when there's no more Bitcoin left to mine. I think that even that one's a two-part answer. Part one is, all of us are going to be probably long gone in 2140, so it's sort of a weird thing to worry about.
I plan on being here.
Yeah, you and Elon can
figure that out.
Ferment yourselves and live forever. Yeah. Part two is, we still have like 110 plus years to figure out a solution to that problem, and there are already people brainstorming different solutions. So
how many are lost? Like how many are like what's that number?
Yeah,
that's a pretty big number too, isn't it?
It's a guess. So what they can see are metrics like how many Bitcoin haven't moved in 6 months or a year. That number is growing all the time. So the lost Bitcoin would be inside that number.
Right. Satoshi had kept 1 million back though too, didn't he?
Yep. I would guess there's on top of that Satoshi wallet at least another 2 million that are gone.
Yeah, those people must be crying.
Yeah, even like there's a really common thing with Bitcoiners. If you meet somebody who understood Bitcoin, 10 years ago, you would expect that they would all be really fabulously wealthy by now. But a lot of those people have lost big wallets. So I have a friend in Calgary who got Bitcoin. He was investing in 2012. And he has a wallet that has 300 Bitcoin in it.
Oh my God!
And he can see it, because you can see inside any wallet, and he knows it's his.
Can't get in.
It's gone forever.
And how many times are you allowed to kind of try and hack it before it kind of like freezes?
Yeah, I think for most wallets it's 3. So
you don't get to just keep pounding away on it.
Yeah.
Maybe AI can figure that out.
Yeah. Probably not. There's lots of discussion around that, and Bitcoin wallets, the secure ones have these 24-word passwords, and the potential number of permutations for that many integers is like in the quadrillions.
Time for hypnosis.
Yeah.
I know a guy too that got them for going to an event, and I think he was buying like Domino's pizza, and he had a bunch left over, and then he just didn't think they were worth much at the time, right? So
there's a really funny meme that goes around where there's a video game called StarCraft that's really big in Asia, and there was professional like StarCraft tournaments that used to happen, and in like 2012 or 2013. There was a StarCraft tournament, and the first prize was $500. I might give you this kind of wrong. First prize $500, second prize $250, third prize $100. Consolation prize was like 500 Bitcoin. It's like, so
holy smokes, eh?
Yeah. So that wallet's probably gone too.
Yeah, scary.
Yeah. So it only gets more and more rare. This is the thing, and Satoshi has a famous quote about this. Lost coins are like a donation to everyone else. So
I guess they up the value of everything else.
Yeah.
The thing about the U.S. dollar, or any currency for that matter, even right now, the debt alone, the interest payments are increasing this money supply, right? Because what is it, like 100 days, I think, another $1 trillion?
Yeah.
Something like that, just in debt servicing.
Yeah.
In the U.S., right?
It's called a death spiral.
Yeah.
So as the interest payments on the debt grow beyond the ability to service the debt, the only thing they can do is print money. And at that point, with a money supply, you have sort of two options. You can let it collapse, or you can just print it.
So what 50 years from now in classrooms, when they talk about currency devaluation, like where does this end up, right? Do you know what I mean? Like at what point, like who, like we know that governments forever have been kind of devaluing, especially since 1929 or something like that. They've been devaluing currency, but like somebody like put it into overdrive in the past few years, right? Like just like if you go look at those charts, they're just crazy. Yeah,
and this is how it goes. I think that the idea of a 2% inflation is, I've heard explained, I like the explanation of, if somebody was stealing 2% of the stuff out of your house, that's just a small enough number that you might not notice. And the reason why now people are upset about it's topical is because it's not 2% anymore, it's 8% or 10%. Someone starts stealing 10% of your stuff, you're going to notice.
Especially if they take TV.
Totally. All of a sudden you're losing the good stuff. But this is how it goes. Every currency that hasn't been tied to gold has inevitably been printed to worthlessness because of this is just how it goes. So what's really interesting is if you look at I was looking at this last night, the history of banking crises and inflation, we have a lot of really detailed and good information about the period just before we went into central banking. So that was kind of 1880 to 1913. And during that period, 30 plus years, inflation over a 30-year period was basically 0%. Yeah. So prices don't change.
Well, they pegged gold to the dollar. Like the dollar was like, you know what I mean? And then when they released that was when they just like, hey,
it's like all of a sudden,
actually pretty cool.
Yeah, we can make all the money we want. And this is the idea of going back to pizza. I mean, if you're cutting up the same amount of pizza, you still just had that one pizza to start with. What this other thing is doing is they're just, you're going to have, the pizzas would be less interesting if all of a sudden there was 50 pizzas instead of...
or they're not real pizzas.
Or they're not real pizzas, yeah.
I don't know. It's definitely, I mean, we could do tons of examples. I think we've talked about them before. But like if you look at the valuations, like if you use gold as a standard, and you can see what gold has done in holding its value compared to the dollar, right? Like you can see. And I think, I mean, I'll just share this real quick. Like again, Roman days, an ounce of gold bought a suit of armor, sword and a shield. 1929, it brought a suit, cufflinks, watch, all that kind of stuff. I think gold today is Canadian dollars, like 3,100, 3,200. Still buy a pretty nice suit. But, like the dollar was worth, like back, I think gold was about $30 back in 1929. What can you buy for $30 today? I don't even know if you can buy socks.
Yeah, it's getting really wild. And this is where, I get personally a little bit torqued about sort of disingenuous representation of things like inflation coming down is like, the purchasing power is a one-way street. So we can't be sure about the rate that it's going to diminish over time, but we can be certain that purchasing power is going to... I mean, you can pull up a chart. Like
you can pull a chart on the internet anywhere and look at the devaluation of the dollar and the U.S. dollar. I mean, the rest of them just kind of follow along. But I mean, some of them have been worse. Like if you talk about countries like Venezuela. Yeah. And I mean, we can go on and on. I think there's 65 economies that are near collapse.
Yeah, and this is the funny idea, like, because people find ideas about Bitcoin can be triggering. We're used to money working a certain way, but part of how we're used to it working is that it's going to be worth less in the future, which really makes it difficult to do anything. Like, if you think about planning your own personal financial security over time, running a business, if you can't be sure about what that money is going to be worth tomorrow, you have to work that backwards, and then it's really difficult to be sure about any of your decisions now. So in those periods, 1880, 1913, when the value of money wasn't changing, that would have brought with it an entirely different sense of stability, because people would have been able to have long-term plans with an understanding of what money did. And that's why, we've also undergone this process of the financialization of everything. So now, like 30, 40 years ago, even stock investing was something that was kind of niche and not everybody did it. And now you have to be invested in the big 7 tech companies in the American market.
It's more complicated for sure.
Yeah.
Like very complicated.
But you have to grow your money because the rate at which it's losing its value is speeding up.
If you put it in, and I'll give this small analogy, if you put it in a mattress, this small one, I think I shared it before though too, is 25 years ago, if you came to Kelowna, and you buried $280,000, and if you bought a house or bought gold, and you dug it up today, that $280,000 would buy you a lot less, because that house is worth about 1.8 million or something like that, and that gold's worth about 2, something like that. But the money lost purchasing power. You buy less vehicles, less everything, and most Canadians, their biggest investment in how they secure their dollar or their assets would be their home, right? And that has kind of gone up with inflation and stuff like that too, right? So
even that causes,
most people can't even afford a home though.
Totally. And so either that party has to end, or nobody's going to be able to afford a house. It's the problem is that and we were talking about this in the last episode. The nature of the free market is deflation. The only reason people would ever adopt a new technology is because it represents an improvement to a previous
Better,
thing.
faster, cheaper.
Better, faster, cheaper. So technology should be driving the price of everything down.
And I believe it will at some point.
But until then, we all need the price of stuff to go up, because we're all trapped in the system where we know money is
because the
becoming
governments only know how to spend to buy votes.
Yeah.
That's all they know how to do.
Yeah.
And it seems like more than ever, that's the key thing. That's the mantra that's being, whatever side of the border you're on, it's buy votes, right? Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, I think our future generations will pay a hefty penalty for that.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that our standard of living in Canada is going to be difficult to maintain for the average person if the money continues to do what it's doing. And, you know, there was an article that was in the National Post in the last couple of weeks about how a leaked RCMP report that indicated the RCMP were concerned that there was going to be sort of widespread civil unrest if and when we start to experience a major change in quality of life.
I think the easy thing is that because there's so much kind of like, I don't know, misinformation or rhetoric out there, is ask yourself and look around. Are people better off in the past 10 years or worse off? Can more people afford to buy a house or not? Like most people, I think young people have even think now they can't ever afford to buy a home, right? So,
you know, and the problem is that this isn't something that a political party change is going to fix, because the money's already been diluted. So even if a new government wanted to get responsible about spending, they can't undebt the debt. And that debt, getting back to what we were talking about before, that debt is compounding and growing exponentially. And for us to get into a place where we were able to make meaningful steps in paying that debt down, the program cuts that would be required to do that would be totally also unpalatable. So whoever gets in, if there's a change, they're going to have to continue to spend. It's 100% certainty that our dollar is going to buy less and less over time. That's just unfortunately the reality of the way it is.
Was that our fifth myth, or there's our last one right there?
Oh, yeah. So this is a great lead into this last question, and it is one that we've sort of already addressed this already. And the question is that central banks and governments working together have the flexibility to intervene centrally and to avoid financial crisis. And so in a Bitcoin economy, theoretically, if governments didn't have that authority to print money, you know, wouldn't that just cause a collapse? And that's a very nuanced thing. Part of this is, like I said, part of the answer would come back to this concept of there's a lot of economic data from gold standard times, and there were less crises and collapses and more stability when we didn't have this crutch of governments being able to intervene whenever they needed to. And this is a political cartoon that's kind of making a joke about this, because it's kind of like going to your drug dealer for your drug rehabilitation counseling. You know, like if you're trying to break your addiction, you wouldn't want to go to your drug dealer. And the banks and governments are hand in hand through a mechanism that's shown in the cartoon.
So we do have examples in the world. Because some people will say, oh, well, we've never seen the examples. They'll just keep printing money. It'll be all fine, right? We do have examples in the world. We have a lot of examples in the world where a country's currency has collapsed. And what happens then is typically the IMF comes in there and they give a loan in different currencies, and they ask for a lot of cuts, and they ask for a lot of resources. You know what I mean? They ask for a lot of collateral, and most of the time the people lose almost. I mean, the society itself kind of collapses, right?
Yeah, you learn a lot about the IMF and the World Bank studying Bitcoin, and there's a Bitcoiner named Alex Gladstein who does a lot of work on this, if you're interested to read up on it. The IMF's loans that are meant to get countries out of trouble are totally predatory, and the problem is that they're US dollar loans where the country receiving the loan receives a loan in a currency that they can't print to pay it back.
Correct.
So they then have to devalue their own currency to receive that loan in the first place. And, you know, hand in hand, what typically goes with that is then
austerity.
Yeah, and they start making products in their economy that don't benefit the local economy. They have to export that stuff.
But the austerity is like cut everything. Almost like whatever programs were available, they have to cut almost everything.
Yeah,
and then so that usually the people on the mid to lower incomes
lose everything,
lose any support, and then the people obviously at the higher end are probably feeding off of that money that's been injected into their economy, and then plus they have to give away a lot of the natural resources and a whole bunch of things that country could have shared with its people.
I think like there's no such thing as a free lunch. So yes, in 2020, printing a whole bunch of money got us through a short period of time, but we still haven't seen the end of that story. Like we're very much in the middle, and what's happening now is a direct result of those decisions that were made then, and it's not a political discussion. It's just economics.
You can say poor decisions.
Sure. And I probably use more colorful language than that if you really ask me. But like, if you go to Venezuela is a great example of a country that was very wealthy and had a lot of oil, had a great economy, and overused the power of centrally intervening and printed too much money, and they printed their money almost overnight into worthlessness. People lost everything, and they really have experienced sort of a social collapse where they can't even get basic medicine. And
so a really good example, like a hardline example, there's two really hardline examples in this past century that are available for us to look at that most people don't understand is that there were two countries that were basically cut in half in a moment. And that would be Germany and Korea. Mm-hmm. They were cut in half in a moment. In that moment, East Germany went one way, West Germany went the other way, North Korea went one way, South Korea went the other way. One of them ran tons of social programs and socialism or communism or whatever it is, and those countries suffered immensely, right? I mean, when they tore down that wall, I mean, the joke was, where do you find a West German's car? Is in East Germany, right? Because now they could finally steal them.
Yeah, and there are those aerial photos of Korea at night, and half of it is lit up.
And half of it's in darkness, right? So those are two hard-line examples, and those are momentary examples, right? Because when that border was drawn, because prior to that line in the sand, or whatever, the mountains or whatever you want to call it, they shared similar economies, similar governments, similar everything, right? Yeah. But that moment, it was clear and decisive in the difference, right? So people say, oh, you'll never know what happens. Well, there's two prime examples of what happens, right?
Yeah, and if you travel around the world, all of the greatest architectural feats and artistic masterpieces, all of these things were commissioned and come from times when the money was, like, on a gold standard, was the 19th century in Europe. It was a time of flourishing. Like, sound money and human prosperity are closely linked throughout history. And so this isn't something that we're going to be able to print our way out of either. Like, it's not like we've magically solved the problem of creating infinite money. The answer is, at some point, we are either going to have a sound money that makes sense and is tied to reality, or we're all going to have a bunch of worthless paper.
So you and I talked off camera prior to coming on. I think Canada is in a great position. We just have bad managers, because Canada is one of the richest resource nations in the world, and that is one way out just for Canada. Do you know what I mean? If we tap our resources and take the royalties and start paying off our debt, and then also start sharing that wealth with our citizens. I mean, Canada is rich, and I mean, we can go on and on. Oil and gas, lumber, mining, uranium, like forestry, tourism, a whole bunch of things. Like, we are a very rich resource nation. Like, and then we just talked about jokingly saying how long it takes to permit a mine, like forever. Even some of the green technology, like, there's so many hurdles to get stuff done. It's just, it's almost impossible. It definitely needs, technology is I think our way out, and Bitcoin is part of that technology, I think. And again, I don't own any Bitcoin, but I think the technology is sound, and it's like learning. So it's trying to learn and understand things. Again, I'll use an example like Uber. When it first came out, I thought it was kind of silly. And then when I use it's Uber is actually a freeing technology for a lot of small business people, right? That in Mexico, and that got to be their own entrepreneurs based on an app on their phone.
Yeah, and I said this before on one of the previous episodes, but this idea that the idea of having a money system that nobody can influence is weird, maybe for us, and we do have something that is referred to as financial privilege, because in Canada, our money works a lot less worse than monies in places like Venezuela.
Turkey right now.
Right. But if you were to live in one of those places, Bitcoin is literally already today a life raft for people who have, like...
Gold as well, or USD even at this point. But the USD is like, I would probably lessen my impact.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and the challenge with gold for people who are living in like more unstable places is you have to physically protect it. So if you wanted to flee and you're carrying a bunch of gold on yourself, you're literally... potentially risking your life.
Target.
Yeah. And so Bitcoin has solved a problem where you have to realize that the majority, we're in the minority in living in countries where the money sort of works okay. That's not true for most people. Like the big populated countries, if you get rid of China, Brazil, there are lots of most of Africa, billions and billions of people live in countries where the money really doesn't work at all.
Yeah, we see that. I think I said 65 economies are on the verge of collapse. Mm-hmm. And that means their dollar's on the verge of collapse, right? That when I say economy's on the verge of collapse, that means their money, their whole system.
Yeah. There's another theory called dollar milkshake, which is the idea that the end stage of the paper money world is that all of the weaker currencies first start to collapse probably into the dollar and maybe the euro and a few of the other.
Well, that's where they go usually. Yeah. They head into one of those currencies, right? When we're seeing a big splinter right now too with the BRICS. Yeah. Where there's a pull towards that as an alternative as well too, mm-hmm. right? So, and those countries are big into gold. They're buying gold into the central banks. I mean, central banks have been buying gold for a while now too, right? So.
Yeah. I mean, and this gets back to what you were saying about the $1 trillion every 100 days on the U.S. debt. I mean, we don't use the U.S. dollar here, but our currency is fundamentally tied to the U.S. dollar. And what is happening south of the border absolutely matters for the way things work here. And they can't print like they're printing right now forever and not experience some kind of a change as well. So
we are the tail to the dog.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So we are definitely heavily influenced. I mean, most commodities in the world are priced in U.S. dollars.
Yeah.
And that's that they've enjoyed that for forever. It's called the petrodollar to a lot of people. And
So we had just one slide to wrap it up, and this is kind of like
what is a summary?
Bringing a summary. That's the word I was looking for. No founder, no board of directors, nobody got rich ahead of time, no insiders, no initial investors back to the Ponzi scheme. There's no website. It's not a company. No executives. No marketing team. This is just a digital commodity that has a finite and fixed amount, and
I see that list and I see opportunity. Like we make websites here.
Oh yeah, you should see if you can get a hold of the CEO of Bitcoin and see if you can do them a website.
Just like, hey, how do you get on there? I don't think we'll leave that for somebody smarter than me. That's been great.
Yeah, really good, Jim.
What are we going to talk about next time? Do we know yet?
Well, we'll be right in time for the Bitcoin halving. So
we're going to have that party. We'll have those details too.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching Kelowna Now.